Month after month in 2017, a dominant theme that I think a lot of us felt was that Nintendo was finally getting ready to give every franchise a new fair shot at life on the Switch. Breath of the Wild reinvented Zelda, Mario Odyssey was going back to its 3D roots, we'd seen a teaser for Fire Emblem coming back to home consoles, and most importantly for today, Metroid Prime 4 was announced at E3 2017 to thunderous applause. All of that is a pretty substantial topic of its own, but specifically for Metroid, we're nearing the 4th anniversary of the Switch, and the only places you can find Samus is on the NES Online, SNES Online, and Smash. That's not quite the rebirth we were hoping for. And earlier this week marks 2 years since Nintendo announced that Metroid Prime 4 was being scrapped from development, handed back over to Retro Studios, who developed Prime 1 through 3, and started all over again. So obviously, I think 2021 is the year for Metroid on the Switch. And our friend Rob from Rule of Two Review is going to stop by to help us talk about it. So let's recap that timeline to flesh it out in a bit more detail. We had Metroid Prime 4 get announced at E3 in 2017. But that same E3, there was a Nintendo Treehouse that announced Samus Returns, a 3DS game that's a remake of Samus 2: Return of Samus, which released on the Game Boy in 1991. And the reason this announcement was so important and significant to be announced the way that it was that Nintendo knew they had a new game that was ready to come out, Samus Returns, and it had to be announced in a pretty specific way. On its own, that sounds like great news, but it's a bit of a monkey's paw situation where the good news of this game could have easily been tarnished by one of a few factors. For one, it's a remake of an old game when fans probably wanted something new. Secondly, it followed up two pretty poorly received games in the franchise, Metroid Prime Federation Force, and before that, Metroid Other M. And lastly, it was a game solely on the 3DS when every game that was coming to the 3DS was being criticized for not also being on the Switch. So Samus Returns could have received a lot of really negative feedback, but the day beforehand, Metroid Prime 4 was announced. So, all good things. Fast forward to January 2019, and we'd seen neither hide nor hair of Metroid on the Switch, other than maybe some rumors about Metroid Prime Trilogy HD a couple of months prior. And as we all know, on Friday, January 25th, Shinya Takahashi showed up on a video from Nintendo about Metroid Prime 4. I remember driving into work that morning, the video went up at 7 a.m. and I got a notification for it, and I was excited because this was only like my second week or so doing the podcast with fanatixfour, and we'd had no news that week. So I was looking forward to talking about Metroid finally, and then watched the video. And about a minute in, I was fully aware that this was not the news we were looking for. At least we had something to talk about, right? And it was bittersweet because yes, while development had stopped entirely, it also was being restarted by Retro, who had made Prime 1, 2, and 3, and those are really well-loved games. And everybody, myself included, felt about the same way about the news. On one hand, it was too bad that this pushes the game even further out into the future, but on the other, this means that Nintendo really cares about making a good game and not just putting out something because they can or they need to. AJ and I talk on our podcast fairly often when this game comes up that we think Metroid Prime 4 is intended to be to Metroid what Breath of the Wild was to Zelda. You may not realize it, but Breath of the Wild by far has the most reach and appeal of any Zelda game ever, and the highest sales by a good margin. And it's largely because of the love, care, and attention that Nintendo poured into it, as well as kind of rethinking what it was to be Zelda in, the 21st century or whatever. So it seems like Nintendo wants to line up their cards just right to make Prime 4 do the same. And frankly, it shouldn't be that hard to outsell its predecessors because for a Nintendo franchise, Metroid doesn't really sell that well. But all that exposition is really to lay out what we want to talk about here today, Metroid in 2021. And I'm going to make an analogy for how I suspect Nintendo is thinking about Metroid on the Switch, which again, I think is going to start this year. So I had a metal band in high school along with my friend James that took up pretty much all of my free time. And in case you're wondering, the songs were fine, the recording quality was garbage. But a couple years ago, we talked about doing a new album. And we didn't want to just put out a song and then be like, yeah, we're back, and then wait another couple years and have another song out there. Instead, we wanted to stockpile a bunch of songs and an album to be able to roll out the red carpet, as it were, to kind of build some amount of momentum up towards the final release. Needless to say, that actually hasn't happened. It's still sort of in the works, but Most of my free time from that went to fanatixfour instead. And James actually is a full-time metal musician, so if you want to check out his band Bear, there's a link in the description. And in Nintendo's case, this is how I expect them to think about Metroid. They have a linchpin that's the end goal of this release cycle, which is Metroid Prime 4, and then they'll have a bunch of smaller releases that kind of lead up to that in a good organic way, which increases brand recognition, grows the fan base, and creates hype. So since Metroid Prime 4 is the central factor, let's talk about that first. For this, I recruited my friend Rob from Rule of Two Review. If you care at all about Metroid news, you have to subscribe to his channel. He's my #1 place for getting any Metroid news. But he just recently made a video talking about the fact that we're likely to see Metroid Prime 4 in 2021, but that doesn't mean it's going to release this year. So, Rob, what do you think?
Thanks, Parker. Obviously, Metroid Prime 4 has been a very mysterious game for much longer than most of us are comfortable with, but here in the beginning of 2021, it's actually an exciting time because it feels like there's a broad horizon of possibilities in front of us. Obviously, with one of those possibilities being whether or not we're going to see the game this year, it becomes really exciting to think about. And I myself am somebody who very much believes there's a pretty darn good chance that we will see Metroid Prime 4 in 2021. And of course, as the overall topic of this video tends to be, we're more talking about seeing the game, having Nintendo acknowledge it, and heaven forbid showing us maybe some gameplay or a trailer, more so than actually playing the game. I'm not sure that many of us believe we're going to be playing Metroid Prime 4 in 2021. It's very hard for me to believe that Nintendo is ready to release the game this year, but I think just seeing the game, actually having footage, gameplay, a trailer, some story context, just seeing Samus again, that's going to do a lot to get many of us really excited. Now, obviously, I spend a heck of a lot of time on my channel talking about Metroid as a franchise, and of course, currently, the hype and mystery around Metroid Prime 4. That's what we do on Rule of Two Review. It's my favorite franchise, so I enjoy discussing all of this kind of stuff. And the reasons why I think 2021 makes sense to actually see the game is honestly because of one of the reasons this video is even being made. We're currently within the week where it's the 2-year anniversary of just the delay of the game, where it was started by a different team back in 2017, and then in early 2019, that version was scrapped and thrown away and handed back to Retro Studios. And speaking for myself as a die-hard lifelong Metroid fan, knowing that they've been hard at work for at bare minimum 2 years since that delay in January of 2019, I feel that they have to have something in a playable state that is an accurate visual and gameplay representation of what the final product will be. Even if they have more than 50% of the game to still make, that still means they have 50% or slightly less than that of something that's probably going to look just like the final game. They've got something after 2 years. And after 3.5 years, almost 4 of complete silence since the game was even first revealed at E3 2017, in my heart, I just believe that Nintendo realizes, hey, this year, 2021, I think that the fan base is owed a sneak peek at Metroid Prime 4. Now, of course, I think there's a fine line between gamers feeling entitled to have a look and maybe Nintendo as the developer and Retro Studios feeling like it's something owed. Those are technically two different things. And I don't really feel comfortable trying to get everyone riled up into feeling entitled to something. If the game isn't ready to show or to release, then they've got to just keep working on it. And as far as my opinion, they can just take their time. But does Nintendo maybe realize that 2021 is the perfect window of time to just show everyone, hey, this game exists, we're still working on it, it's gonna turn out great, you should be excited, here's a little tease, here's 30, 40 seconds, maybe even a minute or two, could we be so lucky? I really feel like Nintendo as the company behind the game is the X factor here, and I believe they know it's a great time to finally show the world that the game does exist, that it's shaping up fantastically, and to keep us really excited.
Thanks, Rob. As Metroid stuff comes up, we're definitely going to talk about some of it here, but if you really want the immediate reactions and nitty-gritty stuff about everything Metroid, definitely subscribe to Rule of Two Review for all that. So we're assuming we see this game in 2021, but it doesn't actually come out this year. So what does that red carpet look like as they lead up to the eventual release for Metroid Prime 4? I think that one factor is, just like Zelda, Zelda, 2021 is Metroid's 35th anniversary. And I know Nintendo doesn't do something for all of their franchises' anniversaries, but I do think it's an opportunity for them every time to consider whether they want to leverage it in some way. Obviously, they did last year for Mario's, and obviously they're going to this year for Zelda. But I guess the question would be, where does Metroid fit in all that? Well, last year was Fire Emblem's 30th, and they did something for that. And of course, although Metroid doesn't have the same representation yet as Fire Emblem does, I do think that they want Metroid to be bigger in the long run than Fire Emblem ever could be. When it's all said and done, there's a limited amount of people that are going to be interested in a strategy RPG. There's kind of a ceiling for that. But when thinking about action-adventure games, shooters, first-person shooters, that's some of the biggest genres there are. So with Metroid poised correctly, which a lot of the hires at Retro seem to be showing that they are, that shouldn't be a problem at all. And one piece that's been floating around as a rumor for a while, but also just makes sense, is a 2D Metroid on the Switch, and I expect it this year. Again, historically, this wouldn't be seen as the big Metroid cash cow opportunity. And frankly, when compared to the possibilities of Metroid Prime, it's not. But we also live in a world where Hollow Knight has sold over 3 million copies, and Metroidvanias are pretty highly regarded as far as indies go. At worst, they're commonplace, and at best, they're highly regarded for their brilliant design. So the scene seems perfectly primed for a true 2D Metroid on the console of the day. When it comes to what that game would be, the easy options are an upscaled port of Samus Returns, a complete new remake of Super Metroid, or a brand new 2D Metroid, also known as Metroid 5. My educated guess, thinking not as a Metroid fan, but from the perspective of Nintendo, is to do both the port of Samus Returns and a brand new 2D Metroid, but spaced out. I guess kind of like we saw with Super Mario 3D All-Stars and then Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. I'd expect that one of these comes out sometime in the summer of 2021 and the other early to mid 2022. All of this still part of the road to Prime 4. Furthermore, it sounds fairly likely that Nintendo's just been sitting on Metroid Prime Trilogy HD for a couple of years at this point. But that's what makes me even more convinced that they're using it and other future Metroid entries as a ramp up to Prime 4, because they did not do that for Bayonetta 1 and 2 going into Bayo 3. And now Bayonetta 1 and 2 have been out for years, and by the time Bayo 3 comes out, it's kind of just going to have to stand on its own merits. So if I were Nintendo and I planned Prime 4 for holiday 2022, which is my honest assumption, then the Prime Trilogy is a very likely candidate for holiday 2021. Visual comparisons to the original will make it look splendid. The controls will ideally be really well implemented, and it's 3 games for the price of 1. That's a lot of good PR right there. It's a slam dunk of a way to build momentum, but also give enough time for people to play Prime, but not get Metroid fatigue by the time Prime 4 comes out. And the last thing I think we can see this year is just a really cool collection of some sort. Maybe even a special edition Metroid Switch Lite alongside a 2D Metroid, and then Zelda would get a special edition Switch or Switch Pro if that even comes out one day. I really think Nintendo's holding all of their Metroid cards to set something really cool in motion, and I think people are ready for it. I put out a poll on the fanatixfour YouTube community page yesterday, basically asking for people's experience and familiarity with Metroid. By far the biggest response was for "I'm waiting to play Metroid for the first time on the Switch," which is pretty much where I'm at too. I've played like half of the original Metroid on NES Online and a little bit of Metroid Prime pretty recently, but as soon as the rumors came up that it was coming to Switch, I figured I'd just wait until then because I'd rather play it on Switch anyway. And for myself, especially recently, after getting Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order for Christmas and playing that a bunch, it's got a decent amount of Metroid Prime DNA in there, and that's got me really excited to play the Prime games, and I love Hollow Knight and other Metroidvania, so that's got me really excited to play the 2D games. So all in all, I think we're just ready for something Metroid, and this is the year I think Nintendo's really going to capitalize on that. But that's what I think. What do you think? Do you think Nintendo's going to put out Metroid content here in 2021? What kind of game would you be most excited about seeing whatever it came out? Let me know all that more in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Tuesday and Thursday here at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And again, subscribe to Rob over at Rule to Review and watch that video. We've put a link in the description of that one as well that we mentioned earlier. So go check that out. And then that's about it for me. So see y'all later. Peace and blessings.